Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to 2026, the best AI podcast in the world, and that is the Rate Limited podcast. You're tuned into Ray Fernando, Adam Larson, and Eric Provencher. We are practitioners in AI coding, and we have a whole bunch of spicy takes for you today. What's going on with Codex, to Simpsons characters, to all kinds of stuff with Claude Crackdown. So you want to make sure you stay tuned all the way to the end. And if you're listening to this, make sure you give us a 5-star rating in all these different platforms. It actually really helps the algorithm. But without further ado, let me just go ahead and get Eric to go ahead and kick us off with this all topics there.
Yeah, thanks for that great intro, Ray, and Happy New Year to all of you and to our audience here. So I just wanted to start off today going through Codex 5.2. So that model came out right after we recorded our last episode, and we didn't get a chance to dive into it before the holidays. So I just wanted to just crack it up today, take a look at how people have been using it, how much better it is than the other models. Like GPT 5.2 had already been released, but the Codex variant hadn't. So before I give my thoughts, I want to just do a little tour here. So why don't we start with you, Adam? You said you gave it a little shot. Tell me what you think about it.
Yeah, I've actually used it quite a bit. I'm going to be honest with you. So when I went into Codex 5.2, I didn't have the highest of expectations because I actually find like GPT 5.2 to actually be kind of hard to work with from a coding perspective. It's very, it gets stuck in its ways. It's hard to kind of steer it. I actually found Codex 5.2 to actually be kind of enjoyable to work with, to be honest. I found like you could steer it more. What it outputs, like it's a little bit more verbose, it feels. And it feels like it actually says stuff that's meaningful, whereas like I didn't feel that way with GPT 5.2. I know that's kind of like a feeling-based thing, but I would say like I did not feel frustrated using Codex 5.2. We're just using straight up GPT 5.2. I did. I did actually try, on your recommendation, kind of the different, like really high variations of it for like harder tasks, and I thought it did a great job. So overall, very positive experience on my end. I probably did, probably 25 different tasks with it. Probably maybe 1,000, 2,000 lines of actual production code shipped.
Wow.
So, but yeah.
Can you get a little bit into what kind of code it was? Was it like more back-end code, more front-end code? Like where is it fitting into your workflow there?
That's a great question. So it's a mixture of both. In this particular case, it was it's an MCP server for an OpenAI app. So there is front-end elements that are kind of like embedded in the ChatGPT experience. So we've got like an MCP backend. It does a really good job kind of navigating existing code bases. I'd say it's probably not as good at design as like an Opus 4.5, just to be totally fair. I think Opus is just killer on that. But it did a great job, like fixing issues and bugs and things that we had going on. I do really like the steerability of it, because I can actually run a longer loop with it, kind of like incrementally working through things where I didn't feel like I could do that with 5.2. From other type of code that I worked on, I did actually do a little bit of work in a large PHP code base, which I know that's kind of, that's a dated thing, but it does do a decent job with PHP too. So I have not found a language that it didn't work well with, honestly.
Oh. Just on your note of the steerability, what I found is that when I was working with 5.2 normal, if I was putting it in the Codex harness, it would just be silent until it was finished, and I had no idea what it was doing. And then if ever it had a permissions issue or something, I was like, what is it struggling with? And you stop it, and then it just dies, and you're like, what is it even doing? I have no idea. But with Codex, it's like telling you a little bit more about what it's doing as it works, which is really nice.
I love that part
faster
of it.
Too. Yeah.
It feels like and it's saying stuff that actually makes sense. So I don't know if you felt this way with GPT 5.2, but sometimes I feel like it would say a bunch of stuff, and then it would be like not always related to like the question that you had. You're like, I don't know if you're going to be doing the right thing.
Yeah.
Sometimes it would go the right way, but it was I don't know.
Well,
if it's
how do you guys feel about the speed?
On that note,
I was curious.
I think, yeah. Well, I just want to just circle back on that last note, and we'll get into the speed. So just the related part, I think like it is interesting that when the model's outputting its reasoning, you're getting a summary view of the reasoning. So sometimes the summary model that is summarizing what it's thinking is not maybe perfectly accurate. And if you're using GPT 5.2 Pro on the web, that is very common that you have no idea what it actually is doing when it comes out. It might be unrelated. So just want to make that little note. So on speed, well, Ray, so you were talking about speed. I want to know, like, what's your experience there? Like, before we keep going and yapping about this stuff, like, how have you spent time with the model? How are you feeling about the speed?
It's really funny. I was just got so disappointed with the speed because I was just using, mostly Opus in terms of like planning and then handing off tasks and stuff like that. I actually preferred the output of 5.2, what it told me. And a lot of times I was mostly doing reviews. So I would basically generate a plan with Opus 4.5 that involves front end and back end. My plans are fairly ambitious, for features. I like to do a lot of research ahead of time. And then I would basically hand that off to Codex. It's like, hey, can you just go ahead and review this? And a lot of times, especially with like working with a database like Convex, they have special conventions. And I'm just kind of double checking that the output is going to follow those conventions, like in regards to how data is stored and like those types of concepts. I feel like Codex kind of really understands that, which is nice. Opus does too, but I don't feel like sometimes Opus tends to like say, hey, I got this out. I'm kind of done. I'm going to move on from this. GPT 5.2 was, I like the way that it displayed the information, if you know what I mean. When it came to writing the code, it just seemed to not be as consistent in a funny way. And then,
so I'm curious though, Ray, is this 5.2 or like in Cursor or like Codex 5.2? Because there's a big difference there.
So I tried it in both, and so not the Codex one, but the 5.2 in both of them, just to kind of compare. And Cursor actually did a really good job of trying to like feed back the information. I felt like I got better output, as far as like readable things and kind of thinking through and the exposure there than I did inside of Codex. And I don't know if it was just my settings or what I needed to do to kind of show more verbosity and type of things, but I always tended actually to gravitate more towards the low models out of all of them. And mostly because of speed, but also just faster iteration loops and stuff like that. Yeah.
You had a good question there, Eric. I have kind of found that I actually don't even know if the 5.2 Codex is available many other places. I don't even think you can do it via
it's not. You could only use it in Codex at the moment.
Yeah. So, but even in prior ones, I still had found that using the Codex versions via API in other harnesses just did not work as well as it does in the pure like Codex harness. So I've kind of come to the realization that if I'm going to use the GPT 5.2 or any like Codex version, I just have to kind of do it in their ecosystem that's there.
I have another thing that I have like, I counted up all the lines of rules files because I have this progressive disclosure for my rules. In my root folder, it's maybe like 20 lines. But as it goes into different directories, like the app directory, the components, or like my database directories, that kind of expands out. And after doing an audit, I realized that my agent's MD file, like when it starts to actually take in all that context, really bloats everything. So as of the last week, I've just been removing all my agent's MD files and kind of just starting from scratch and just watching to see what the agent is doing. So this is kind of my task this week, is just a lot of house cleaning. And maybe it's just a note for everyone else too, if you're doing this type of stuff. The models are a lot smarter now, and I don't have to give them as many rules as before. Same with Opus as well. And so gonna just redo a lot of things that I've been doing before, and I'm trying to see if I even need to give it any more rules. And just kind of, do these piecemeal like prompts instead of just kind of doing a lot more automated like YOLO type of stuff. Yes.
So I actually want to touch on that a little bit, because I one thing that if you're trying these different models, you'll kind of realize as you're working with them. But like Codex models, GPT models in general, they're very sensitive to any contradiction in your prompts and instructions. And if you're writing a lot of rule files and you're making the models read these files and work with them, they might start to get to a rule, and then they'll be like, oh, wait, this is contradicting what I was doing before. I can't do this. I'm not allowed to do it. And then they get in thought loops and they're not able to kind of worm their way out of it. And it gets to very problematic output. So, when you're using Claude models, they're trained to sort of ignore your rule files in many cases if they don't actually respect what they need to be doing. And Claude, the harness, especially if you're using Claude Code, it will go through, and in the system prompt it says if the user has invalid information in the Claude MD file, just ignore it. And so the model will just do what it feels like. So sometimes you spend all this time actually investing in these rules, the models don't listen to them, or they listen to them too well and then they don't work. So you have to be careful about like how you're prompting these models, and a big part of prompting them is these rule files. So just be mindful of that. So it's a good thing to look at. And I think, you know, as we kind of get through this, I just want to touch a little bit about something. So skill files are something that's kind of being widely adopted now. And if you're not, you know, we talked a little bit about them in a previous episode, and I think like, we did some more, a bit of work going through them, but I just want to revisit them a little bit, because as they're kind of going, through the different harnesses and, they're becoming more widely adopted, I think it's becoming important to think about them. And one thing that I just want to touch on that I think is very important. So, if you're used to writing slash commands and different things in your files, for your different harnesses, one thing you might not know about skill files is that they're actually able to be invoked by the model itself. So as the model's working, it can discover these files and then take on skills and learn how to use them on its own autonomously. So I'm just curious, before we move on to the next topic, has there been a change in your guys' use of skills? Is that something that you guys are adopting a little bit more in your workflow? Adam, why don't you, let us know first?
Not as much as I would expect. Honestly, it's a really tricky subject for me, because I see the value of skills and I see how they can be beneficial. But a lot of times I find like the more layers that we keep adding on top of our agent kind of over time degrades the quality of code I'm getting from it. So I struggle with like how much effort I want to put into like building up like a huge MCP repository of things, or like skills, or even agents.md files. I am much more like less is better, and then using my knowledge to kind of guide the AI, and having it make decisions and being able to direct it. And I'm also okay if I like build a plan and it's a little bit off and I need to just go say, I like this plan, but change this instead because of whatever thing's happening. I know everybody doesn't fall in that camp. I'm much more of like, I like it like a co-pilot with me. I'm not as big of a fan of just needing to have everything defined and have the AI be perfect from the get-go. And sometimes I actually really like, I like the back and forth that I can have with the models, and I like trying to have it as my co-pilot. I will say there are a lot of people I work with that are huge believers in skills. So I know I might be in the minority here, and all the time I'm always getting asked about, different skills and things that people are trying, and they're cool, but they seem to be very short-lived. Like someone will build something, they'll use it for a little while, and then you'll ask them a month or two later, they're not using it anymore. So I don't know, Ray, like if you're in this, where you're at in this camp, but that's where I am.
Yeah, I'm still in this discovery phase, and I'm just kind of thinking about them as like enhanced like Lego pieces or something. So when I was building an iOS app last week, I was just using it for the documentation workflow. So iOS 26 is still fairly new. Working with foundation models as a concept for these models is still extremely new. And so there's these directories in Xcode where you can actually feed it saying, hey, here's some like really minimal documentation. And so a lot of times when the agent is doing some like type of task or it's doing some type of recursive loop, and it's like, oh yeah, that's right. In my plan, I need to implement this and I don't really know about this. So let me just go, do this quick lookup, and it already kind of knows where to go. So it's like a really lightweight rule. So I kind of think about them like light, medium, and heavy. And I'm trying to keep everything as light as possible. So I have like, there's like one like mini skill for that, just for documentation. And then I have a build phase type of thing. So Claude by itself can actually figure out how to build the software, launch Xcode for you, or launch the simulator and do a bunch of good stuff for you. And so that was an interesting thing, just kind of letting the model figure stuff out. And then there's an MCP server now that I found out that it can actually do like automated testing. And so I'm more interested in that. It's like, cool, if I have this change, can I just spin off another parallel agent or something to do just sub-agent tasks of like some type of testing? And it, that MCP tool, I think it's written by Cameron. And so it takes screenshots of the whole thing and that uses the accessibility tree to kind of dig through stuff like that. I was like, oh, this is
just
an
want to
interesting
shout out that one
experiment.
That's the Xcode build MCP. So it's like a layer of using the Xcode build like CLI tooling with some Apple script and some different automation layers to try and like automate the work of like kind of not having to touch Xcode, which is a terrible app. but still getting some good iOS automation workflows happening for you. So yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Just wanted to
Yeah, no,
clarify that a little
that's
bit.
perfect context. It is funny because for web development, I do something different. So on the web dev side of things, because web development is still a fairly new domain for me, and for that I was like, oh, this is interesting. I notice when I do a lot of prototyping, I have a lot of dead code, and so I made a little mini skill that would just basically go through and start just scrubbing different functions and different things. It's like, are we using this after a phased plan would finish or a feature would finish? And it surprisingly finds a lot of really good stuff. And I was like, oh, this is a perfect task for Codex, So like, so that's kind of where I'm experimenting here. It's like these tasks that I don't necessarily want to do by hand. I just kind of want to be flagged about them. It's like, okay, cool. Hey, Ray, you should be aware of this. This is kind of what's going on. And so it's like, oh, there's smoke here. There's probably fire. So let me go ahead and start. That's kind of where I get involved in the loop of things. And so eventually the goal will just be to hand everything off, Ralphing and stuff like that, which we'll get into more later in the show if you want to stay tuned.
Yeah. So I think that's a good place to segue out to the Claude Crackdown that we've been kind of seeing today. So if you're not familiar, what's been happening is that a lot of third-party agents, open source ones in particular, have been using this sort of hack where they would take the auth token that Claude Code generates and then impersonate the Claude Code harness in an effort to access the subscription rate, like usage of Claude, models. So you got Opus and Sonnet and all of those, but not having to use Claude Code. And so, if you're familiar with Open Code, there's a new Pi agent as well. There's a whole bunch of them, and people are using these auth hacks to kind of just build their own workflows, customize the experience a lot more deeply. So, like this happened like last week where all of a sudden all those models, all those harnesses stopped being able to use Claude, as Anthropic had gone and blocked the usage from this hack. A lot of them have found workarounds since then, and it turns out that just uppercasing the tool names, so matching the tool name so that the harness looks the same, is correct. And you also have to say that you're Claude Code. But it raised a lot of questions in the community around, like, why is Anthropic doing this? They'd kind of like turned a blind eye to it for so long. So I'm curious, were you all using these hacks and different harnesses? How do you feel about it? I'm curious, Adam, what your thoughts are on it.
Man, I feel like this is such an interesting topic. Do you guys remember back when the Gemini CLI came out? And Rue Code at the time very quickly, Klein, Rue Code, both very quickly implemented sort of their pass-through so that you could actually use Rue Code's harness and then basically just use the CLI command to actually utilize your free Gemini usage. And very quickly, Google shut that down. At that point, I started actually researching Claude Code because I was like, if Google's shutting this down, why wouldn't Claude Code do that? And there was kind of like conflicting messages. Like on one hand, Claude was pushing the sort of like Claude Code SDK. I think they call it the Agent SDK now. And they wanted you to build like applications on top of Claude Code. And it seems like people have taken that to another level where they're trying to even bypass the harness as a whole, which I think is a super gray area. But my question at that point, looking at their terms of service, is technically back even a year ago or whenever the Gemini CLI came out, Claude could have shut all that off there because it made it very clear that their product wasn't supposed to be used in any competing product at all. So to me, it makes sense that Claude's doing it. I think there's probably a lot of abuse that's going on and I know there's people that are probably frustrated with it, but if you think about it, that everyone's being impacted by the people that are overusing and abusing Claude Code as a whole. I'm not a fan of like them marketing it as sort of this SDK and like something that you could build on top of and then slowly taking that away because we don't know where that line's going to end. But I also think it's very fair for them to do this crackdown. I think more than likely they're losing a massive amount of money on Claude Code subscriptions. And now I know it's a big corporation. People are always, say what you might about like a $5 billion, or what are they, a 200 or $300 billion company at this point, massive company. But when you chalk it all up, at the end of the day, they have to be profitable, and it's their right to do it. We may not like it, but it's just something we need to accept and go forward. But I also think there is a counterplay to this, which is open code. If you look at like the growth of open code, I think I recently saw something that they're hitting 1 million monthly active users. That is insane. As someone that was like a very early on user of open code, it has come an incredibly long way. If you think about the two differences in the company, open code, they're never talking about replacing engineers. They're very much like, it feels like a company that's built with like true engineers at the helm, building it for people that care about engineering. So I think what's happening is Claude Code is getting scared or nervous about folks. I'm not saying it's open code, but it's just one theory that I've got. I got a feeling that they're getting nervous that some of they're losing the end user in a lot of ways, like because people are preferring working with open code over Claude Code. And I also think you chalk that up with losing money, and then you pair that with them probably wanting to IPO this year or next year, and they've got to get their books in order. All hypothetical, but you would imagine that's got to be in the talks. I think it makes sense from a business perspective, but I also think the timing of this is like kind of odd because honestly, Anthropic's been like at an incredible high. Like everybody loves Opus 4.5. Everybody's been talking very positive about it. And for something this has just caused a lot of negative press for them. And there's a lot of people that are very angry about it because they paid for a subscription thinking this thing was okay because it was never enforced before. And now that's been taken away from them. So I see all perspectives. I don't know. It's a very nuanced situation to me. Be curious to see what you guys think.
Yeah. How about you, Ray? What are you thinking about it?
I think Adam really nailed it. I don't really have any skin in the game, to be honest. And I think if I was paying for it and it got rugged and I was using it this way, I'd be extremely disappointed because why did you let me use it for so long? We've been users of this for a very long time. I think as an indie dev, like doing research, you don't have the big budgets of these big companies behind you with thousands of dollars to throw every month at stuff like this. And so I think it actually ends up hurting us, to use this stuff, not only for the agent SDK, but just for, individual use to explore, to learn. I think that's why people are getting in these like looping type of, spinning up tons of agents and tons of windows. Like the McKay Wrigley's, I remember he spun up a bunch of machines and his account got like rate limited, right? Rate limited podcast. There was other folks who were trying to do these runs that would run for 24 hours. And I think we need more exploration like that, I feel like, in this community, because it's still such a young technology and we need to figure out what these limits are to the very ends of things. And I do understand that from their business perspective, they have a business at the end of the day. And, we can't get a free ride, but hey, set some aside for us,
Yeah, I mean, I just want to just chime in a couple things there. So one thing is, when you're using these agent harnesses, one of the key things you have to think about for like efficient use of the model is like really good prompt caching. And I know that if people are going crazy with third-party harnesses and doing experimental stuff, they're probably not hitting those caches in the same way that Claude expects. And that can really raise the costs up quite a bit for them, because they are, expecting certain usage patterns. And if those usage patterns aren't being hit, then it doesn't really work. But if you're looking at something like open code that really tries to mirror how Claude Code works, in that case, the usage patterns are very similar. It's just they don't have all the same telemetry around it. I think like there's room for these providers to talk to these open source agents and try and work with them. But, when you're using an open source agent, people can customize it. And if you allow it for one variant of it, it's hard to stop different ones. And it gets to be very chaotic in what the door opens. And, on this note, I wanted to mention that OpenAI had the opposite approach, and they saw this happen and they took it as an opportunity to grow their market share and said, hey, actually, we're going to work with open source agents and integrate them directly and whitelist them on our endpoint so that you can use them how you want. There is a flip side, though. So all these harnesses are typically built around Claude models. And when you throw in the OpenAI models, they don't behave quite the same way, and they're not trained with the same tools. One key example is just file editing. So Claude models are used to doing file edits with something called search replace. So, if you've hit Control F in your document, you can find a line and replace it. That's how Claude models edit files. Codex, instead, the way that it's trained is that it will generate this weird diff patch, and they have a custom patch tool that replaces text that way. It's very different, and the way that the model kind of expects edits to happen is different. And I wanted to mention as well, the new Codex model actually is better at doing this kind of search replace style edit, but it's still better at the patch style. So it's interesting to see that like OpenAI is trying to open up and go to these harnesses, and maybe they're going to train how they change how they train their models to kind of work better in these different places. We'll have to see how that goes. But it's just interesting to see the different approaches, and you can see like Claude is in the lead, and they're trying to clamp down to kind of seize control of the market, whereas OpenAI is playing a little bit of catch up on the coding game, and they want to try and gain market share. So there's, these AI open source harnesses are definitely a big leverage point for this battle to take place in, and it's interesting to see. So as we wrap that up, I want to kind of just dive into a little bit about something that Ray alluded to, and we got these new things over the holidays, these agent loops that people are running, these new ideas that people are trying to experiment, and a lot of them are ways to burn an insane amount of tokens very fast if you're not paying attention. So just as we talk about, these subscriptions getting tighter on how you're using them, people are finding new creative ways of burning as many tokens as possible and spending, what could be thousands of dollars a day very easily. And if you're using some of these parallel tools, it can be thousands of dollars an hour. You never know. So I want to talk about the first one here, and that one's called Ralph. And that's a Simpsons character. And if you're not familiar with the techniques, it's actually been around for a little bit now. And one of the key reasons it exists, and I'll explain this a little bit if you're not familiar, is the idea that a model's context window is not evenly distributed. So if you look at Claude and you say, okay, it has 200,000 tokens context window. If you're using up all of it, you might observe that the model is actually less intelligent than it was earlier in the context window. And so the idea of Ralph is to say, okay, we're going to have a budget, and the default, I believe, is 80,000 tokens. And when the model hits that 80,000 tokens, it winds down, kills itself, and starts fresh. And so the idea of Ralph is dumb. He comes fresh every time. He has no idea what was happening. So with the Ralph agent, he'll read the plan, look at where we're at, do some work, close off its progress, and then let the next Ralph take over. And, this is a loop that you can run, and ideally you have a max number of iterations. Otherwise, you can let it run for 24 hours and it might just, go on and give you a big bill at the end. So you have to really watch it and be careful what you're planning with it. But it's an interesting way to work, and it's an interesting way to think about, managing this context window. And I see it as an alternative to doing compaction, which, compresses the work that's done and kind of hands off in the context window. So it's like a different way to think about it. I haven't spent a lot of time working with it, but I know Ray has spent some time playing with this, and I want to hear a little bit about how he's using Ralph in his workflows, because Ralph is, great for huge, ambitious plans, and I think that's something Ray really likes to work with. So tell us, Ray, what are you doing with it?
Yeah, so I've been kind of doing the piecemeal parts of it, and like this week is going to just be where I let it really go crazy. But the piecemeal parts have been like just the general software development cycle. So I kind of got some hints of this when I was making my soccer game 12 days before Christmas. And so I was like, okay, there's a programming language I don't know. Let's just see how, I could just kind of walk through it. And so I spent like a day and a half doing the architecture planning. And it was like a really big, ambitious plan, 2,000 lines or something like that. And so that was like the most important piece. What doing it in Cursor sort of taught me is like, okay, every single task or every single phase, had to be kind of broken apart into subtasks and these different types of things. And so I looked at my bill and I was like, okay, I was able to do it at under $200 for like the whole game, And so what was really interesting is every chat, like I just looked at my, at my bill is like 75K tokens, 65K tokens, it was just very specific types of things. And when I would run into issues, what I would do is like, oh, there's no hook for this yet. I should set up some type of Rust build or something like that so that I can, build it as the agent is going. And so I was just kind of piecemealing my way there. I didn't like let it run autonomously. And this has kind of been all leading up into what I'm going to basically do this week, where I'm just going to like, I feel like I've built enough tooling I've played around with enough of the skills files of like taking a project. So I'm going to try to rebuild the whole game again, just in a Ralph loop, using everything that I've learned. And so one of the interesting parts of Jeff Huntley's thing is that you can decompose an app that's already been built and generate specs, and then from those specs rebuild the app again, and vice versa. So he's also was interesting saying like about Ralph loop, saying that you can actually take an existing app and run it in a loop to actually decompose its actual core features and like bring it back down even to like assembly level if you wanted to. And he has various examples of this has been done in history where somebody who used to work at Intel or something, left and worked for AMD, or somebody actually just reverse engineers Intel's, chip in a clean room, and they wrote specs, got a golden parachute, was out. And then they basically, hired a team of folks to build off that. And so he talks about like, the two-way street of this type of thing. And so this is like a fascinating concept for me. And as far as getting a loop, I can get a loop going for like a small feature, but I want to get it going for like the full on thing. And I think along the way, part of what I was talking about earlier was removing agents files too, because I was learning that they were getting in the way of the agents too. Really going to just be sort of like supervising the Ralph to see, like I think maybe compared to last year, especially with Sonnet 3.5 a year and a half ago or so, the models seem to be much better at sort of guiding themselves, or maybe they go into a loop and they check themselves later on and they kind of self-correct without me actually giving a rule, which is really interesting. So the interesting factors here are just like, can I have it generate its own, hooks at the end to verify work? Am I just generating more linting rules types of things? I'm starting to like really question a lot of these workflows, and even question libraries and things. And it's making me even question about at like a deeper philosophical level of software engineering, like, the software that is made was really made for humans to review, right? Like the buttons and like, Amazon, like the web portal and stuff, but there's a lot of stuff you can do in the CLI, like you don't have to. And if you can talk directly to, the back end, you can do a lot of stuff without even touching, GUI or something like that. So
absolutely.
So it's a multifaceted type of thing that is, as far as like, Ralphing itself is kind of silly if you just kind of let it run off and you don't really have a lot of experience. But as a person who's worked in the industry for a long time and been through all these phases of software, I'm very meticulous about these little details that I want to either learn about or try to like keep it on the rails and so forth. So I feel like I do have this powerful engine, but also like you just can't let it go crazy. You have to kind of like really try to guide it. And so kind of like that parent just kind of letting go of that kid riding the bicycle. So yeah.
Well, to your point on guiding it, I think a big part of it is also building up your code base in a way that is suitable to this kind of loop. So like one thing to keep in mind is like you have a large plan file. Well, if you're giving that whole plan to each loop, it's going to fill up its context with that plan. So you have to break that down into small files, which I saw someone on X the other day was like, here's my huge plan. It would read the plan, read 5 files, and then halt. And then it would have to run again, and it was just looping, reading, and it was never doing anything. So like you have to be careful how you're organizing your code base. So are your files too big? Are they easy to discover? Are your plans well separated? Because the key thing is the context is very limited in a Ralph loop, and you want to make sure that you're really making use of each loop as efficiently as possible. So like you're building your tooling, your hooks, and all of that, but you also build the validation, but you got to automate making discovery easy too. So there's like a whole science around that, and that's something that people are starting to discover with this. And I know Adam has looked a little bit into it as well. I don't think he's used it quite as much, but tell me, Adam, like what are your thoughts on this idea?
Have you ever, I'm trying to think about when this was, but probably about 4 or 5 months ago, I remember going to dinner one day and I queued up like 15 messages that were like, keep working, or improve this, improve this, improve this. Because I knew it was going to take a while. And I was just like, I just want to see what it did. So I queued up a bunch of them, came back, and that's what originally when I read this, that's what it made me think of. It's like literally you just want it to keep going. But I like the introduction of the limited like token usage and then kind of restarting it. I think it's a great like research project. I personally struggle to see practicality in an actual like production setup. And I could be proven wrong. I love I love stuff like this. In fact, spend a ton of my time like doing random stuff like this. But it does feel more like a toy than it does like a tool for production use. And I'd be curious what you find, Ray, as you kind of dig in, if you end up landing in that same spot or if you think it is actually something kind of viable. Because ultimately, I am much more of a fan of like code that can be reviewed by a human. And I don't want a crap ton of code like built at one time that I need to go and like productionalize. I want it to be done in like bite-sized pieces so we can kind of move it in and like less
Have you heard of
risky
Diffs, Adam?
blocks. I have, yeah.
Yeah, so that's
You want to explain a little bit what that is, Ray?
Yeah, so the concept
go for
is
it, Ray.
that you can basically break apart your work and kind of have it almost serialized so that you check in a small feature. For example, if you're going to work on this feature, first you want to work on the schema for the database, and then you have UI. You're not going to check in the UI first. You're going to start to work on the back end stuff. Once you start working on that, you create a PR, and the PR sits there, and then you can stack another. You basically just check out that branch, and you can create a PR on top of that. So you basically keep creating PRs on top of each other. And so when it goes to review time, you're reviewing basically that first part, that first PR that's really focused. It's like, cool, I made my schema change. Okay, this stuff looks good, submit. And then you just kind of keep going up and down the stack. And so what's nice about it, there's Graphite made this tool that basically will allow you to change to any part of that stack that you're in. And then you can make changes within there. And all the rebasing and stuff that you need to do is just literally just a sync command. And what I've been finding really fascinating and sort of trying to train a skill, make a little skill file around this, it's really lightweight, is that's signal for an agent. So if there is a conflict and it's writing something, the agent would be like, I need to, run the rebase command. And then it gets more information back saying, something changed below me, which is dealing with like the way the data modeling was set up. So maybe I should kind of take a look at that and see what's going on. And so that's sort of like self-discovery. The other part of it is I have like BugBot from Cursor that's running. So whenever a PR is created, it automatically runs in the background and it'll give feedback for that as well. Graphite has their own thing too that does that, but I prefer BugBot's thing. So part of this, building this Ralphing system is to have these different feedback loops that would come into that type of thing. So that's kind of like, I guess you could say stacking in a nutshell. And this is kind of, something that I'm still kind of discovering, trying to figure out, how can I have these additional checks that can run in these other places? Right now it's a coding agent, but that could be other tooling that I built in the future, to run some type of build process or do a test pass, right? So when I want to ship this feature now, I have this, large stack that I would just approve by myself. So when I wake up in the morning, it's like, cool, let me just go through the stack and see what's happened. And everything would be, lined up in phases according to the plan, which is kind of really neat for me. Yeah.
So I just want to chime in here a little bit because I like this idea of stacks. I just worry, when you're in a team that's quite large, if everyone's building these stacks, they all become like kind of skyscrapers on their own. And then when you try to collide them, what do you end up with? And the models can like find the points in the production where they conflict and try to adjust. But like if you let them auto adjust all the time, then what you end up with at the top of the tower might not be what you actually set out to build. And so you have to watch out for that. So I think like a lot of these ideas
adopted this, as far as that's what they use for kind of where it really came from and stuff like that. And these other bigger companies apparently have done this. So I don't know what exactly their workflows because I never worked there, but it's something I've been playing around with.
I think the idea is sound, and I think you need something like this on large teams. The issue becomes, how far down the stack you build before you do these collisions. Because, I think if you're with the idea of Ralphing, people can build skyscrapers overnight. And how do you deal with like 50 skyscrapers in a week, from all the whole team that has to deal with all of this? When you're on your own, you're able to go nuts and just keep building. But like with everyone doing the same thing, it doesn't really, how do you, it stops making sense. So
it does, yeah. I'm in the same boat, Eric. And imagine me coming in on Monday morning and being like, Eric, I have a bunch of things that I Ralphed over the weekend. I need you to code review. You're going to be like, I'm going to kill you because...
Yeah. Well, I mean, you have project tags, right? So I used to work, merging all these crazy, thousands of projects together. And we could, on the morning of the build, if something broke, I take a stack trace. I could see what changed. Like, okay, the mail team submitted, the Bluetooth team submitted. there's a conflict here. Let's just roll the Bluetooth thing back and just do a test real quick and see if it makes it boot. That's cool. Something in the Bluetooth stack broke. Y'all need to go, like, here, we rolled you back. Here's your tag version. Something changed between here. You and the mail team need to talk. Come back to us. Like, it's if you have a large code base, you'd have all these projects that have their own tags that would submit at those different times, right? Even if they're their own stacks of things. And then you would just roll back their tag and try to rebuild again and see what happens. Because there's not much that would change between a build per se, but it's traceable.
Yeah, I think the issue though is, like, in the world you're describing, Ray, you have a bunch of islands that are kind of working and they end up in the same build. But like in this case, it's like each island is building up so many things and expanding and growing that, like, just rolling back one thing, especially if you're building on top of each other and like intermingling the code, like, you can't just rip out one piece, it stops collaborating and making sense. It's just getting tricky to deal with, as the volume of code goes up.
Yeah, I agree. And I see exactly what you're saying, Eric, because that's where my head went. It's like, because even within that tag that you talked about with the Bluetooth team, if you've got 3 engineers on that team, each of them are doing like crazy Ralphing loops, and they've got all this stuff that's happening and all this stuff that's colliding. Like, for them to even unwind that or get them to actually merge together or be in something usable just seems, or reviewed and productionized, seems like an uphill battle in my mind. Like,
well, let's
from a
flip it on
startup
its head
mode,
for a second.
0 to 1. Yeah, go for it.
Because I was thinking about the future of software engineering, right? So if code is so cheap to write, and if we can now back out code super easily and then take an agent to review that hairy change and say, what's the feature we really want from this big ass change that you committed? Okay, cool. Can we just distill that down to something simpler as like a secondary run, right? Like, just back out their change, throw that away, and just take distill down and then like retry again. Can you get a better, output from that, right? I mean, if it costs you $10 an hour or something like that, or maybe $30 an hour if you're running Opus or something, is that worth the try? Like the loop for another loop for like a day or a couple hours or something like that. I was just curious.
So I just want to pause on that a sec. Like, what you just said, you just threw that casually. I mean, that was actually a point that was going around on X the other day, where if you take Sonnet and you run it continuously with API pricing, it's about $10 an hour, which is quite high. Like, just to think about, like, it's like a minimum wage worker in the US, depending on the state. And if you're saying, Opus is $20 to $30 an hour, that's like a professional in some capacities, working continuously. So, and if you have each employee who you're already paying a lot, running these extra loops, so your costs are inflating. So code is no longer like that cheap. It's cheaper to generate a lot of it, but if you're continuously generating it, the costs are still significant. So throwing it away can make sense, but you don't want to be wasteful either.
There's also the time factor on it too. There's a lot of times, like when you're in a big company, where other teams are dependent on something you're doing, and then if you delay something, they get delayed, and it all just kind of cascades into a much bigger cost than the $10 AI cost that we just talked about. I don't know, like I've come to the realization, and I love research projects like this. I would consider like this Ralph loop a very cool research project, kind of like a thing that I'd want to do to play around with it. And heck, I may take it to 0 to 1, something that I want to get started, but I would never. Not right now. My mind could be changed. I'm very malleable. But right now, I just don't see it being practical, like in a team setting and trying to build something that other people have to consume and review. And I would also just kind of add on to that, like, I personally feel like Anthropic has done such a bad job talking about how AI is going to replace engineers. And the reality is nowhere near that. Like, I really do believe the best engineers are the ones that know how to use AI to speed up what they are doing, not replace what they are doing. So part of like why I'm also not the hugest fan of like trying to even do this type of thing is that if we end up building something that kind of builds out this entire feature that writes 10,000 lines of code, I still don't believe that is going to be anything more than just AI slop, because there hasn't been the reasoning person kind of like driving the decisions that have been made along those 10,000 lines of code that have been happening. So I worry a little bit about, like, I don't know. In general, I just worry if there was some big company that were to see something like this and they were like, hey, we're going to implement this and we can replace engineers with it because we can run these loops overnight and have all this cool stuff happening while product managers build this stuff. When the reality, I don't believe, is anywhere near that. So that's my concern.
Yeah, I want to push back a little bit that it's all slop necessarily, because I think maybe today, you look at, you're running a Claude in a loop and you're like, yeah, this is all slop. But like, I think there are ways to get a lot of code generated that isn't slop in these kind of automated fashions. And I think over the next year, a lot is going to change. And I think we have to be ready for the idea that if you run, an AI model loop overnight and it generates 10,000 lines of code, then maybe it won't be slop for very long. And I think that comes down to two things. So one is like your verification and your planning around how you're making sure that the code that is built is sound and meets what you want out of it, and then that ties into the spec that you built and generated. So this is what we can call like spec driven development, and it's like in history this is the waterfall approach. And if you're doing waterfall, the idea there is that you're spending all of your time upfront determining all of your requirements, every last detail of what you actually need in your product. And then you're handing this off to an engineering team to build over a long horizon. And the metaphor there works very well for agents because it's the same thing. You're handing it off, a pre-built idea of a spec that the engineering team, your agents, are executing on, and they need to be able to validate, as they go that the spec is aligned. Now the issue is twofold. So one is, are you sure that your spec was good? Because if it's not, then like you're gonna get a bunch of slop. And are you sure that like you didn't put too much detail into the spec, that maybe you overthought certain things? Because what a lot of people are doing right now is that they're having AI generate these huge spec sheets and they're not reading all of it, and they're letting the AIs build the whole spec sheet, and then they end up with something they don't really know what they ended up with. And then that's an issue too. And if it's too complicated and you have contradictions in your spec because you didn't audit it properly, you're gonna have contradictions in your code, and it's just not gonna work. So you have to be very careful with these ideas of where you're spending your time and energy. And I think like there is value in trying to front load the planning, but there's only so much you can do there before you hit reality and the code compiles and you have to try and make sure that it's working. A lot of the time a human is there doing QA as the code gets written, making sure that the alignment is right. And a lot of tools so far have been around this constant loop of iteration with the human sitting there trying to make sure that as you're building, you're steering it in the right way. But we're going to get further and further with long runs, and the desire to run these things in parallel grows. So our ways of thinking about working with models is going to change and is going to continue to do so.
I have a question for you guys. Who do you think are like we can kind of see the slope of the models in getting better, and we think some people say it could be months away. Dario Amodei was like claiming it was like months or years or something like that, somewhat imminent. But like we're kind of seeing this. For me, like if we think about maybe the next 5 years, who are the lowest hanging fruits as far as companies that will just be like 3 meta bros that leave because they got fired, but they're really good engineers, and they're just like, you know what, I'm gonna just take this part of the business and just run with it because I'm cool with making $10-20 million as a solo engineer, like on this project or something, or $100 million or something. Do you guys kind of have a sense of like what businesses could be disrupted pretty fast because maybe they're rethinking things and they don't have to have this bloat of a big project behind them?
Yeah, I think a big risk factor right now is like, it's not so much that you're going to say like all the humans are going to get replaced by AI, but you have to think like, what are all these humans doing in an organization? And if there's like teams of like 1,000 people that are each doing small tasks every day, why do we have so many people doing all these small tasks? And that's going to be a question that's going to get asked more and more, because if you're going to have one person do the tasks of 10 people in a day, why do you need those 10 people doing them? And then so the question is like, who ends up there as the employee that's left behind running this org? And will these orgs adapt, or will new orgs form that are leaner? That's a big question to ask. So it's not so much that AI is coming in to replace everyone, but it is accelerating enough that like you have to ask like, who is actually piloting them and who's left behind. I'm curious what you think, Adam, on that.
Yeah, it's so hard for me to see a company. Let's just talk about the big ones. Like, let's say Apple, for example. I have a very hard time seeing a huge disruption in a company like Apple with the use of AI, particularly because when you look at the scale they operate at, I honestly believe that the code they write is not the bottleneck. It's the coordination between the teams that need to happen to work at the scale they need to work at. So it's like AI can help us move faster in those little pockets, but most of the time it's spent in the coordination side across that entire organization.
Yeah.
And I don't see AI solving that.
Not at all.
But I do think like what we should be doing is we should be able to write better code faster and get our own product roadmaps done quicker. But what I'm actually seeing is kind of people trying to approach it the other way, where it's like, we want to generate as much code as possible. And, you even saw that with Claude. They did that post where they said, hey, we fixed 85% of our bugs and we used Claude Code to do it. And then a couple days later, they had to roll back that change. So it's like, first off, 85% of bugs, like, what does that mean exactly? But are they also in that same boat of like, oh, we're just going to use AI to generate a bunch of stuff. Oh, crap, that broke. We're going to have to roll it back. And now we got to do some manual work on it. That is my fear. It's like, I really want people's mindsets to change into how do we use AI to make our code better and we can move faster on a roadmap versus just like put it in a Ralph loop and have it generate my entire thing that I need for the next year. Anyway, that's where my personal stance is on it. But like I said, things change so quick. I'm happy to have my opinion changed on it. I've been in a big company now for a couple months, and I will tell you right now, code is not the bottleneck in these organizations at all. It is 100% coordination.
Yeah. And accountability, that coordination comes down to who's accountable for the code that goes into production.
Exactly.
Who do you contact if something breaks? How do you deal with that? And because you have customers depending on the product, and you need to be able to find out, and make sure and trust that when you push a build that it's not going to break and destroy your business. And that's just something that's tricky to do. And AI just doesn't have the context window, the context like understanding of your business, of the code and everything as a whole. And we're coming up with tricks to get them to do more with a context window, but that's not enough to fit like the business plan, the coordination, and all of this other stuff. The model just can't hold all of it. It's just not possible. So that's just a big limiting factor.
It is, yep. But Ray, to your point, startup mode, I think startups should be able to go faster than they ever have shipped before. Single founder team should be able to move super fast.
Absolutely.
But it does, like, I don't know what the transition from that to like a 30,000 person company looks like and how AI speeds up that entire process versus like the individual islands should be able to move faster with higher quality. And I feel like that's something a lot of people forget, is it's not about code volume. It's about like, are we releasing less, smaller amounts of defects? Are we actually making higher progress on our product roadmap because of AI? That's the type of things that I think people got to look at.
Though, Adam, I just want to chime in with some other experience that I've heard. So I've talked to some folks in different businesses, and one of them works at an insurance company. And they were telling me that, their mandate for the year is to try and find all of the cogs where they do outsourcing at the moment and try to automate those points. And like, they have different technical support levels, and like they want to fully automate like the level 1 support, level 2, maybe level 3. And so there are places where, there are bottlenecks in the systems, and it's not all related to engineering work, but there are like triaging and different things that with system, and when you have a big organization, there's a lot of stuff that comes in. Your requests come in, you have to manage them, route them properly. And all of that stuff, I think, is all very ripe for disruption. So I think we have to really reset our priors, and everyone's been ultra focused on, because these things write code. Are all the engineers going to go away? But there's a lot of other things, where this code runs, or there's things that are manually done, and that's very ripe for disruption. So I think this year is going to be a big year for a lot of disruption in a lot of places, and we have to really pay attention and stay vigilant out there, because things are changing fast, and it's very easy to kind of close your eyes, but like this stuff is happening. It's a freight train. You can't stop it at this point, and it's trying to find leverage in the current system as it is, and see where we go from
first
here.
off, I totally agree with you. I think there are parts outside of coding that get disrupted very quickly by what we're building as engineers. QA, I think, is like a role that I'm really skeptical will exist, 5-10 years from now, like an actual like just QA person that sits and manually tests stuff. Disagree if you want, but I also think like what you talked about, support roles, especially level 1, that doesn't seem like something that's going to be needed much longer at all, if at all now, to be honest. And that's going to keep ticking up.
Yeah.
So totally agree.
Yeah. Any closing thoughts, Ray, on this?
No, I think it's going to be a wild ride. I think with, these like banks and other types of financial institutions, I know like Claude Cowork just came out. So there's this new playground that people can start to play around with. And so what we were experiencing with coding, with like, our CLIs and stuff is now going to be like sort of mainstream, or other people can say like, hey, reorganize my desktop, or why don't you just look through my mail? Because I'm going to try to use it for my taxes. And there's a lot of stuff I don't want to search through. I just want to tell my coworker to go just find all the mail messages with all these receipt attachments and look for this company and just fill out these spreadsheets for me, please. Like, I don't want to do that. And so there's probably a lot of people who are frustrated. And once they kind of see that this is possible, then they're going to start going crazy in their industries,
Yeah. It's going to be a wild year and many years to come. So I think that's a good place to stop for today. So thanks to everyone who joined in. Thanks to everyone who, referred someone to the show. And if you haven't and you like the show, please do spread the word. It helps us grow. It helps us, find new audiences. And if you have anything that you had questions about in this show, or you have topics that you want us to discuss for future episodes, please do leave a comment. And let us know. So thanks so much, and happy 2026 to everyone. I feel like this little closing note was a little dire or grim, but there's, a lot of hopeful, a lot of optimism to look forward to as well. So I hope that, everyone keeps a, fresh, open mind to the year to come, and, just tries to lean in and try to learn what they can do to gain leverage in this changing world. I think that's really important. So
Yep.
Thank you.
I love that. And Eric, I will say, I am very optimistic about 2026. So I'm not negative on it at all. I'm excited about this year. And I also think that building on top of AI is such a fascinating space. So if you're getting into the industry, right now is the time to look at like how to actually build on top of LLMs. Like get it to do something, automate it. I think where jobs are going to be in the next few years is going to be that. So all the things that we talked about, like if you can come in and show that you could do that, I think you have a good chance of getting into the industry.
Absolutely. Good place to
All right.
end for today. So thank you so
Later,
much,
guys.
everyone.
See you guys.